everything that I have to do today, have to file a story, have to prepare for a podcast, and then have to prepare for a third video project, and then take Gemma for a walk. I'm a journalist. I am a writer for the Wall Street Journal and a CNBC contributor. My story began when I was working in fashion after I graduated college from NYU. I found myself totally miserable at that job and I ended up leaving it. With nothing else lined up, I then got an internship at a small trade publication called Debtwire, where I was really writing stories about the ins and outs of finance, talking to bond traders, money managers, and writing stories about something called the municipal debt market. From there, I came to the Wall Street Journal. My favorite thing about my job is I get to talk to everyone from the biggest hedge fund managers, professional investors on the planet, to mom and pop investors with either retirement accounts or, Robinhood traders in their 20s. So I get to talk to people with such a range of backgrounds, a range of portfolios, and one of my favorite stories to cover the past few years has been the rise of individual investors, the rise of everyday Americans in the US stock market, and I think there's just so much more to tell there. This was one of the hardest stories I have ever reported in my 8 years at the Wall Street Journal. I led our coverage of the meme stock mania, found people who were willing to talk about their meme stock wins. I had a front row seat to covering the GameStop mania for the Wall Street Journal, and I ended up on the phone with all these individual investors who seemed to be making a ton of money trading GameStop, trading stocks like AMC, and it really seemed to mark a turning point in markets where this new type of investor was more engaged than ever before. And it was such an exciting story to work on, and it actually turned into a Netflix documentary with the Wall Street Journal called Eat the Rich, and it was our very first Netflix collaboration ever, so it was super exciting. Being involved with the documentary production was totally different. It involved working with a different team at the Journal, involved working with an outside production company as well. The Journal had never had a Netflix collaboration before, so it just involved a different type of storytelling. And we ended up reaching a whole new audience to that, just from the feedback I got from that Netflix documentary showed me that just a whole new investor base was tuning in to watch my coverage and to watch the Journal's coverage, which was so exciting. And I think it's so important. As a journalist, I think that's one of the most important things you can do today is think about how can I reach my audience? How can I reach new audiences, right? Who might want to tune into money, markets, and investing stories. I think journalists need to evolve to meet this media moment, right? I think it's more important than ever that we meet audiences where they are. So I think a lot more of my job is just focused on how can I tell stories as innovatively as possible and be as creative as possible in my storytelling. So it's not just reaching, the type of investor that I've always spoken to, but also the new investor that might have entered markets the past few years that might be interested in their portfolio more than they are in the past. So I am spending a lot more time on vertical videos, social media. I recently joined this podcast. So I think it's all about how can I reach the audience where they are today and try to be creative in my storytelling. And I truly think everything on the planet is a money story. My philosophy has been to say yes to a lot of things and to bite off more than you can chew and then chew it, because I think we're all capable of so much more than we think. My second philosophy, and this is a life philosophy, not a work philosophy, is to be the first one on the dance floor. I think one of the most fun parts of my job is I get to work on such a range of projects. I get to write for the Wall Street Journal. I get to do podcasts and video and work on different projects there for the Journal. I also get to go on TV sometimes for CNBC. So I get to tell money and market stories in just such a range of ways, which is really exciting. So today, for example, I get to talk to you guys in the morning, and then later on, I'm shooting a podcast for the Journal, and then I'll be working on a story. I usually wake up, take my dogs out, I walk to work, which I love. I love walking to our offices and having that 40 minutes in the morning to listen to Bollywood music and Latin music before I get to work. And then I'm usually doing a mix of, catching up on what happened in markets overnight, what's going on in the markets in the morning around 9:30, right when the opening bell rings. I always want to know what's happening that day, talking to people on the phone, investors, other sources. Then I'm usually spending a little bit of time doing research for stories and, again, trying to talk to as many people as possible. I think the world of money and markets and investing can be so opaque, and it does not have to be. I always think of my hairdresser, and she, every time I see her, she is asking me questions about her investment portfolio, what stocks she has. The other day when she was over, we ended up looking at her brokerage account, seeing what types of fees she was paying, seeing what her portfolio was in exactly, whether or not she was getting ripped off, and trying to explain things and make this world that I cover accessible to people who don't understand it. Trying to make it accessible to people who don't understand it is really what drives me today. And I frequently think of the types of questions that my hairdresser and I are chatting about, right? Because this is someone who wants to grow her wealth through the markets. She wants to understand this space better, and I think we all can. The next step for me, I just always want to get better at telling money, markets, and investing stories. I want to reach an even bigger audience with those stories because I truly think that there is more interest in this field than there ever has been before. There are more Americans involved in the stock market than ever before. They're checking their portfolios more than ever before. So I want to talk to them as much as I can and reach as many of them as I possibly can. One audience that I really want to reach is younger investors who may have just opened their first brokerage accounts. I think a lot of these investors are opening Robinhood accounts, opening Fidelity accounts, younger than previous generations, right? Maybe it's at 19, 20, way sooner than I started investing, and they're being really smart about it. So I want to do my best to talk to those investors because I think they are just more engaged than previous generations were, and I think they're smarter than previous generations were in terms of investing earlier. One of the biggest personal barriers that I faced was being a little bit too timid and not assertive enough early on in my career. So I would encourage young women, young South Asian women, to really just go for it and think about what would your 75 or 80-year-old self want you to do in this moment. I think that is one piece of advice that I have to young South Asian women who want to get into any career. I think learn poker. I think it teaches you so much about risk-taking, being aggressive, making calculated bets, and I wish I had started learning so long ago. And it's just fun. It's really fun. For journalists, of course, we are focused on how can we tell stories creatively and through multimedia. But I think at the end of the day, the kernel and the seed of the story is the most important thing, right? You need an interesting story. You need to focus on original reporting and original storytelling, and the rest will follow from there.